Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another lesson in class. This is
Lesson 38. Does science understand philosophy? So let's get into it, shall we? Does philosophy even make sense to science? Well, in order for philosophy to make sense to science, science would have to study the aspects of philosophy that make it work, i.e., not just asking the same questions that everybody else asks, because, well, there's a highlighted special problem that you could get paid a lot of money for, but the other questions that happen naturally in life, gravity, nature, so on and so forth, right? And because of that, and because of the technologies and certain belief systems, some people may or may not understand the philosophical structure when it comes to certain things. So, yes, science may not always understand philosophy because sometimes philosophy can sound like a riddle to science. Point number 2. Has philosophy ever impacted science? Well, of course it has, right? By asking hard questions, developing a hypothesis, right? You're able to then test your theory. But without the testing of the theory to prove if it can be done or not, over and over again, does it still categorize as science? Because you have to remember, if something cannot be repeated over and over again, science will still consider it a hypothesis because not everybody could do it. It's kind of like an Olympic gold medalist, right? Science wants everybody to be a Olympic gold medalist, or they in the field want to be a Olympic gold medalist. However, only a handful of people can be an Olympic gold medalist. They can only do but so many things, whereas the gold medalist could possibly do more things. Same thing when it comes to military specialized units, so on and so forth. There's a select few that are able to do things that other people cannot, and that's just the way it is. And science has a hard time sometimes dealing with certain aspects of this because, well, what people don't understand, they fear, and what they fear, they want to control. And when they can't control it, well, they neutralize it. Think about that for a second, right? Because they need to maintain power and control. Point number 3. Does science use elements from philosophy? Now, if you talk to people in the physics space, so on and so forth, they will say, yeah, we do, but we mainly work on laws that already exist. There is a influencer that I follow named Leah. And one of the interesting things that she pointed out was during her training to get ready to go to NASA, one of the rules in there is to not disobey the laws of physics. Why? See, here's the thing. The same thing that could be done on a small scale can be done on a large scale. So if the government can impede or put and create new laws, why can't the science department do so? Not by identifying those new laws as defying the laws of gravity, but having a better understanding of how different laws can be applied within the scientific sphere in comparison to a government or a body or sphere of people within a organization, business, entity, whatever you want to call it, right? They instill more laws. Well, those laws get changed all the time, but yet when you're training to go to NASA, don't mess with the laws of physics because then it'll mess everything up for us. Why is that? Are they slow? Are they fast? What's going on that they have to put that literally verbatim in text for people to read? Think about that for a second, right? Because this is where we start to get into critical thinking now that we're wrapping up class with lesson 38, and then of course 39 being the last lesson before we move into, well, spirituality. Point number 4. Can philosophy be used to advance other disciplines? Well, of course, right? Philosophy can be used to get a point across or to get some type of message through when it comes to things like poetry, artistic expression, so on and so forth, right? When you see art in general, when you see science or law, so on and so forth, how do you present? What's going to capture the attention, right? These questions that are being populated right now is an exercise that is done in philosophy to not only emphasize the power of critical thinking, but thinking outside of the box. If you remember the Will Smith video about the IQ exam, right? The old IQ exam, one of the questions had 9 dots in a box, and the only way to connect everything without taking the pen off the paper was to go outside of the box. Just like you should be thinking outside of the box, right? Not everything comes in a straight line. Sometimes you're going to need to curve or arc it, as they say, right? Or bend it like Beckham, right? So let's continue. Does critical thinking still play a factor today? Well, do you think critical thinking plays a factor still today with everything going on that people are seeing in the media? Funny story, I did this little science experiment because I wanted to see how media was being portrayed. And this one lady that I knew, she wasn't from here, but I wanted to see how she was getting her information. So I borrowed her phone knowing that she was not a full citizen yet. And I did the same search I did on my phone on her phone, and there was different information that populated. This was very interesting, and it led me to go to Walmart to purchase a cheap $50 Android phone and then do some A/B split testing. Those of you in marketing understand what I'm saying, right? Or in the scientific field, you have a A/B split test, right? So I had my laptop and my personal cell phone attached to the Wi-Fi, and then I had this other side phone that, well, although I purchased it with cash, I had it on a different IP address. But magically, it all managed to sync up together when it came to searches. Now, when I introduced the other person's phone, who was from Europe, by the way, right, part of the European Union, etc., they were getting different information. I said, interesting. I wonder why, right? Because, well, with the adaptations of artificial intelligence, you have algorithms and everything else, and Big Brother always watching how fast can they change data or information that gets displayed so that it can be slightly skewed to protect certain secrets from people that don't care about secrets, that are just willing to give them away for a buck. I don't know, but it was a very good experiment. And then a friend of mine who's a computer person jumped onto the phone and he's like, Mike, you know, I can see what you're doing, right? What's going on? And I was like, I'll tell you in a minute. Let me just finish my science experiment. Talk to you later. And so we clicked off, and then other stuff happened. But, you know, it brings me to this point in lesson 38 of class. Like, seriously, why not ask or test the hard questions similar to the way scientists do? And why is it that some people normally get in trouble when testing or pushing boundaries of science to better humanity? Let's do a mic check. We're still good? So if you're getting anything, excuse me, if you're getting anything out of this video so far, go ahead and smash that like button, and don't forget to follow me and tell some people about this so they could get a better way of thinking better when it comes to not just life, but the other categories within life. So let's move forward. If we are beings of light, couldn't science be used to change one's appearance? Okay, so in certain movies and, you know, math class or physics class, for instance, we did an experiment with a laser where we were able to transfer sound using light. Now, if you're able to do that with light and sound, could you not also do that by manipulating the light waves that the eye sees, right? If you can manipulate someone's vision, then they would not see someone in front of them, and it would almost be like instant camouflage, right? So you could bring somebody in that may look like a boy of one complexion, but then if you tweak the cones and mess with the RBG structure within the eye, if that's true, I mean, we could just Google it, for instance, right? Or go get a journal or ask an optometrist. But if you start to mess with the cones and the retina and things like that, the digital display can be affected, meaning that person would be thinking that they're speaking to a stranger when in actuality they could be speaking to someone that they know. Now, I know this sounds crazy, but it shows up in Star Trek and people are accepting of it. It shows up in Star Wars, but people are accepting of it. It shows up in video games, but people are accepting of it. And it comes off as fictional because remember, anything that has not been identified to you as a person and defined by science and mathematics is indistinguishable from magic. And if you try to speak about this, they will call you crazy, right? But then again, how many of you crazies out there understood that the quote that I stated came from Thor in Avengers? How many crazies are there? How many of you go to Comic-Con and get dressed up? Are you crazy for doing so? Then you might as well call everyone crazy that dresses up for Halloween. Or everyone crazy that dresses up as Santa Claus for Christmas. To put a smile on someone's face. Think about it. Science doesn't just wish to have understanding, but power and control. See, what's the purpose of the double slit experiment? Most people would hear me and they know me by now. And if you don't, my name's Michael, former military, so on and so forth. And in lesson 39, just going to prompt you now, I'm going to come off similar to the way a preacher, chaplain, or military personnel, if you put all those people together, possibly with a little bit of DMX, I'm going to be opening my mouth in lesson 39 in that type of fashion. I just wanted to prime you for that event so that you're in the proper state, so that you stay tuned. Now, let's get into this, right? Most people would understand the term nosy Nancy. And if you don't understand that in the book or one of them, it says, in order to enter into the kingdom of heaven, you must first enter in with the mind of a child. Well, children are normally curious and nosy. And who's more curious and nosy than nosy Nancy? Hence the double slit experiment that they talk about when they show particles and atoms being observed, right, in one state, moving through slits in order, so on and so forth, while they're being observed. When they're not being observed, similar to children, then they do whatever it is that they want. One mic, we have company right now, and there's background noise. So give me a second. How's it going, guys? Doing well. So let's continue, right? Because one, we have the double slit experiment, which is well known in physics and science, right? But let's go a step further, right? What did Snowden say about people being listened into, right? Well, we want to know what they're saying when they think they're not being watched, right? When they think that no one is listening to them. And one of the things you get taught is you have to remember, it's not what you do when everybody's watching, it's what you do when you think nobody is watching that matters. See, everybody's willing to put on a show and a facade for, well, social media and the picture and being on stage. But what do they do behind closed doors, right? What did Michael Jordan's homeboy score again this weekend? Or did Michael Jordan's homeboy, upset a couple people and, his lady needed to massage some things? What happened, right? How come there's only one-sided information? But if somebody like Michael Jordan were to say, yeah, my boy may or may not have practice making babies, if you know what I'm saying, but practice makes perfect. So I'm going to go with a yes, that someone got, lucky. We'll just say that, right? Because you can say that and get away with it and have everybody understand, right? So let's continue, because do you agree with the greater good theory? If so, what's your number, right? This is something that every salesperson, every business person understands, right? What's your fucking number? That's what they want to get to, right? When are you going to sell out for a particular number? Now, if you're talking about the greater good theory, you sacrifice the few to save the many, right? The greater good, right? So what's your number of the amount of people that you're willing to sacrifice in order to protect the many? Think about it, for crying out loud, right? Because if you were in the category of being sacrificed, would you see things through a different perspective and give different perception, right, to others that you speak to, since word of mouth marketing happens to be the strongest form of marketing according to your business sciences, right? When you learn about marketing in, let's say, as a major for business administration, someone in communications, etc. You can do advertisements and lip service all day, but the reason they do social media and lives, today I saw something with Gary Vaynerchuk, and they were doing some sleep study, right? And it reminded me of when I did magic, and they had something called a rapid induction, and somebody would shake someone's hand and they go sleep, and people would fall asleep, etc., so on and so forth. Now, they weren't doing any of that. They were actually selling something on something called the Stan Store, which is a online place or location where you could sell digital products or, other products as well. And they were talking about something to help people go to sleep, yada, yada. But, is it for real or is it for fake? In the military, or at least for the Marines, one of the mottos is if it was easy, everyone would do it. No fucking shit, just like business, right? If it was easy, everybody would do it, right? But then when you get people that want to step in and develop in people what's known as learned helplessness, right? Because learned helplessness would be this. There was an experiment with a group of flies. They put them into a jar, or fleas, and they're prone to jumping. They put a lid on the jar, and then after hitting a ceiling, right, of so many times, right, they believe that they cannot surpass that. So what they do is they leave the lid on for quite some time. Then they take the lid off to make sure that the reinforcement, whether it was from a positive or negative standpoint, depending on the perspective and the perception of the way one was viewing this, now you have all the little fleas that wanted to jump outside or go outside of the box, listening to some invisible force that controlled the lid that went on top of the jar. Now, when that lid was taken off, none of the fleas jumped out. They only jumped high enough in order to, well, not hit the ceiling or the glass ceiling that was put there, right? This is where you would hear people like Andrew Bustamante and other people, when they talk about three-letter agencies, when they're doing proper recruiting, they look for people who are too dumb to quit, right? Well, that's weird, because certain people in presidency said that you're dumb if you join the military. And then in the military, they say never quit and never give up. So are they looking for people from the military, or just stupid people that just keep trying to push the envelope? And then what happens to those people, right? Do they try to use leverage, such as entrapment or blackmail? And there's a difference, right? Although two different words, and you could watch the movie Entrapment with Sean Connery. See, entrapment is what cops do to criminals. Blackmail is what criminals or other people do to each other, right? And it's just a play on words, but the words mean something very differently for different sides of the fence, whichever you reside on. Some people will say, ooh, give them one, and they'll respond, kill, which comes from, well, a lot of Marines that say it, right? But then you hear a civilian say, oh, I'm going to kill this person, and you might take it literally, right? Because of lack thereof understanding or loss in translation. You may hear somebody else say, oh, I'm going to neutralize this person in a very calm manner, or I'm going to destroy this person, etc. What are they saying specifically? What's their background? What's their vocabulary? How are they using the terminology at hand? That's why you have to listen to context clues, right? If you're simplistic and you're listening for keywords to be triggered so that your eyes can click, right? Then what you want to do is understand that you need to understand the context within the content that's being delivered. There's a Latin song, right? It goes, este, oeste. And if you don't understand the lyrics of the song, right? And I ask you, what were the directions set in there? You might have put east, west, or that way, so on and so forth, right? Or this, that, and this, or este, oeste. What are they referring to? Because if you say west on a map or compass, it's oeste, right? East is este. But if you want this book, dame este, right? So it gets confusing at times, and most people don't have the patience to understand the context within the content that's being delivered, so they misconstrue words, because the brain works like Google. It operates off a keyword. So if I were to say a taboo language by Sigmund Freud and say, what the fuck is going on? People only hear the F word, right? And then that triggers an emotional response, right? That's what I'm referring to as the keyword research that they apply to, well, things like Google and how they make boatloads of cash. But people don't want to open their eyes to see that small connection, right? So think about that. What is your number when it comes to the greater good theory, right? If you wanted to protect the many, how do you select the few that you sacrifice? Think about that. And who are they? Everyone's got a list. Amazon even has that, right? The Terminal List movie, everyone's on a list. Jeffrey Epstein, right? Diddy list, etc. What list are you developing, right? Let's move forward. How does philosophy play within story? Well, within philosophy, we use and utilize analogy and metaphor because sometimes people don't always understand how you are a direct reflection of the universe, right? So I would give an example like Nikola Tesla and his infatuation with the numbers 3, 6, and 9, right? We're the third rock from the sun. It apparently took 6 days to make us, and it takes about 9 months to make a baby, and then they go to school for 9 months out of a 12-month calendar year, right? So what happens, right? Why don't people understand 369 in that aspect, right? Why don't they ask particular questions or open up their aperture, right? Right, to increase their vision, their focus, right? The aperture is something on a camera that you would open up to let more light in. So if you want to say, come over to the light, don't be scared when the wind is moving, right? See, that was an allegorical or a analogy or a metaphor that was used, right? When the wind is moving, right? What's on the air refers to the media. So if I'm using number one, i.e. freedom of speech, some people thought that I didn't believe in, the architect God or whatever, but in the fucking book it says in the beginning was the word. Last time I checked, the most important thing is the word, i.e. freedom of speech. It's covered there. It's covered in the Constitution. If you don't get that, then people do end up using number two. You saw what happened in exercising that right in a so-called free location or country, whatever you want to call this organization or corporation, right? So does philosophy play within story, right? Does it work? Yes, with analogy, with metaphor, to get it through to certain individuals that are very logical and not creative or artistic, right? So if I were to say, how is a person developing, right? Similar to a tree, right? Well, a tree starts off as a seed, but in certain contexts, they say a seed is planted. In marketing, we plant the seeds in order to get you to purchase something. That's why when I go to places and I speak, I ask people, how many of you have an iPhone, right? How many of you get upset when you see the green instead of the blue, right? These are all psychological factors that psychologists and philosophers took into account based upon not only studying herds or groups of people within sociology, but the individuals and the effects that it has on particular individuals in their own respective environments, right? To see an animal out in the wild is to be truly amazed by what is not supposed to be seen, right? Hence the double slit experiment. So here's the thing. When it comes to philosophy and things like that, when it uses metaphor and analogy, right? How do you view the metaphors and analogies used in things like television shows and in movies, right? I mean, let's look at the movie Deadpool, for instance, right? In the movie Deadpool, he does something called breaking the fourth wall. Some of you that are into spirituality know about 3D lifestyles, 4D lifestyles, as well as breaking the fourth wall. So let me do that for a second. So when you break the fourth wall, what does Deadpool do? He stops and he looks at the screen, right? In spirituality, this would be praying by yourself in your car. You're breaking the fourth wall. To whom? To whomever is listening that you believe in, correct? Yes or yes. So when this occurs, you break the fourth wall. You speak to an entity. You don't know exactly the entity, like Deadpool in the movie. He does not know whom he's speaking to. He's just speaking to the viewer and the observer of the content and explaining more of the context within everything as he does so, right? And then, of course, there is the TV show Suits, where Harvey Specter says, do not do in public what you can achieve in private. There's a movie called Zorro, right? There's a part, or better yet, let's talk about Daredevil, right? So Daredevil was relatively popular out on Netflix, etc. And there's this part where he'll go to like a priest and confess in private, and then the priest will talk to him in private. Whereas other people may know stuff similar to that, but they rather do it on a public scale. Now, depending on their intentions, then this is why, some people would say women do it better, or it's better if you do it this way, because things that are done in private hopefully stay that way, and you know who actually is hearing everything. When you're doing things in public, are you doing it for yourself? Are you doing for what? The bravado, the clout? What is it that you're doing it for when it's done in public, when you make a scene? Ooh, this person right here that knows all that science and that math, right? Or, yo, I heard you're really smart, so on and so forth. Do you mind if we talk over here, like in the corner, away from everybody? That's completely different. Or do you mind if, like, one of my people speak to you? Like, I have some questions that I want to ask you. I don't want to call you out in public, right? And that's the difference, but different cultures have different things. The thing is, when the other side starts pushing back, some people may get upset. But iron sharpens iron, and that can come from one of their books, right? You don't use how do I say this? You don't use other materials outside of diamond to cut certain things, because diamond will normally cut certain things to make it more perfect, right? And a diamond saw that you could purchase at Home Depot, a water saw, or the expression iron sharpens iron, you can say diamond sharpens diamond, etc. So think about that. Now, for the last 2 points, right? So what about Psalms 82:6-7? He said, ye are gods, right? Now, if you ever seen the movie The Librarian, the first one for the spear, the spear of destiny, right? Apparently the spear that pierced the side of Jesus Christ. In there, he goes to a Buddhist temple. There's a riddle written on Buddha's belly in order to unlock the secret compartment to get the top tip of the spear. Now, in there, it says, what's the name of God? And in the movie, he hits M-E, me, right? Because God is in everybody, right? So if you don't understand that analogy, then what don't you understand? See, when we talk about spirituality, I could talk about nerds, right? So some people would say the universe, some people would say God, some people would say creator. If you listen to Star Wars, people would say the Force, the connected consciousness that everyone feeds into. However, it could still be used for good and or for bad, right? Because you have the light side and the dark side of the Force, right? So think about it. Those who are using certain words, right? Are you getting upset because you were trained to believe that certain things were good and certain things were bad, and so therefore your perception or your perspective has been skewed, so you take things a little bit more personally because of the way you were brought up? Remember, children are not naturally assholes. They are trained that way, right? Now, I'm not talking about the movie Meet the Fockers, where the little baby, with Robert De Niro, where he learns the word asshole, but children are not born that way. It's a learned behavior, right? People normally emulate not only the people they surround themselves with, but their environment as well, right? So I'm going to hit on this next point in the next lesson, but for some of you that want to think critically or use some critical thinking skills, I'm sure you heard of the book Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. Now, did the order of that title upset you with the labels and the way they were placed? Because, well, does Venus not come first and Mars comes after? So was that the issue? Was it because Venus was described and taught to you to be feminine and Mars was more masculine, so on and so forth? Mars was also known as the god of war, etc. Then you have Venus. Well, what about Mercury? Was Mercury male or female? And if it was male and he had to get along with Venus, no wonder they created Earth and Mars to create division against the male structure and the female structure in the plane where they're supposed to learn how to get along and fucking communicate without causing any wars. And then, of course, you have Saturn. They refer to that as Lord of the Rings, but in the courtroom, right, that's where you go to, well, legally get married and exchange rings, right? hence Saturn, right? And its rings of law, power, balance, etc., right? And then, of course, you look to each other for confirmation in order to know, hey, babe, am I doing this correctly? Is this the right thing to do? Similar to the movie 300, when Leonidas looked back at his wife before he kicked the messenger down in the hole and triggered the Battle of Thermopylae, along with everything else. And then, of course, let's not forget about the, well, oracles and how they screwed everybody over for money, for gold, right? They had false things to say to him in order to, well, get treasure for somebody else. And that played out very interestingly, especially when it came to the second part of the movie, Rise of an Empire, right? Where everybody united, right? It wasn't just the Spartans, it was all of Greece along with Athens, right? So if ye are gods and, this, that, and the third, it does make sense. And I will explain this more in lesson 39. But remember, if men are from Mars and women are from Venus, then it does make sense, because it takes longer for Mars to go around the sun. It takes longer for men to normally mature, and it normally takes less time for women to mature. It's been played out in history. It's been studied and understood in your sciences as well as within psychology. So go ahead and dissect that for a minute and then ask yourself, right? What's the significance of, well, the points and everything that add up, right? Because I had 4 points here that I listed, 3 points earlier, right? And then, of course, I had 5 points, etc., right? What does that add to? And then, of course, we have 38 and 38. I'm pretty sure it comes out to 11, right? So what does it add to? What does that meaning add to? And if you've seen other lessons in class, you know that everything's not only connected, but I don't miss on purpose all the time. Sometimes I do miss about 15 to 20-ish% of the time, but then again, I'm okay with that. Why? Because of Pareto principle, which is the 80-20 rule, right? Think about it. Till next time, my friends, I will see you guys in the next lesson of class, where we wrap up science just before we get to spirituality and emotions. So till next time, my friends, take care. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.